Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome to the show. Lots to do today. I want to start off with impeachment talk. Let's get a big, broad overview of what's been happening with John Malcolm. He's the Vice President of Heritage Institute for Constitutional Government, which I'd love it if we could get back to that. Mr. Malcolm, how are you, sir?
Good to be with you. I'm doing great.
Good. So give us a big picture. What do you think everyone's missing from this whole process so far? So you're watching this, you're hearing everyone talk about it, and what are you yelling at the TV? Like, no, you guys are missing this very, very important point. What is that thing?
Well, I'm not sure that anybody's missing anything. I think it's pretty boring, actually. I mean, I think Adam Schiff is doing the best that he can by interspersing these videos and clips from emails and things, but you know, all of this has been laid out during the House's investigation. There's nothing new that's coming up, and you can only repeat the same thing so many times. We heard a lot of these arguments the first day when they weren't even supposed to be presenting evidence. They were just, arguing about motions. We went through however many, God knows how many hours yesterday, and we're going to get 2 more days of this. I feel really sorry for the senators because they're not allowed to have coffee on the floor of the Senate. So I'm not quite sure how they're staying awake, but there you go.
So, and I'm totally with you. In all seriousness, why does it take 24 hours for the Democrats to make their case? And why do they think that they need to use all 24 hours, right? Don't you think it'd be to their advantage to try to make it a clear, concise case and, no joke, 20 minutes? Why 24 hours?
Well, I might go somewhere between 20 minutes and 24 hours. They have up to 24 hours. It's unclear whether they'll use all that time. Although, look, I think they are viewing this in part as a 3-day commercial as to why the president should not be reelected, because they're certainly not going to get a conviction and removal from office in the Senate. I don't even think I'm not sure they'll get any Republican votes in favor of a conviction on either article of impeachment. They certainly won't get to 50 votes, much less the 67 votes that they would need to actually convict and remove him.
Amazing. I want to talk about something you tweeted out the other day. This letter from attorney generals in 21 different states.
Yeah.
And it's a really good letter that these guys wrote. And they go into pretty good detail about the 2 articles of impeachment. And to my failure, I have not gone into great detail of what these 2 things exactly are and the legality behind them, if you don't mind taking us through these a little bit. So abuse of power. So what's the actual charge when it comes to abuse of power constitutionally?
Well, so the Constitution calls for impeachment in the case of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. High crimes and misdemeanors is left undefined, but it obviously is something along the lines of treason and bribery, a gross violation of our nation's principles. And most constitutional scholars will agree that a gross abuse of power would constitute an impeachable offense, even if it isn't criminal. So their theory is that the president clearly went against the best interests of the United States and our national security by delaying these payments to Ukraine. And the only reason that he did it was for a personal benefit. The personal benefit would be to gather dirt on his likely major political rival, former Vice President Biden. They keep saying, well, there were these debunked theories about the Ukrainians engaging in attempts to interfere with the 2000 election. And there are these discredited theories about Joe Biden doing what he did in the Ukraine in order to protect his son, Hunter Biden. Well, you can say that they're debunked and they're discredited, but there is plenty of at least suggestive evidence that these were matters that ought to be looked into. And the Republicans are going to say, look, you can agree or disagree with what the president did. Ultimately, of course, he released the funds and then some. He included giving them, Javelin anti-tank missiles, something Obama administration had never done. But they're basically alleging that he did all of this for a corrupt purpose. The problem is that they lack any hard evidence that there was a corrupt purpose. The second article of impeachment, I think, is really absurd. It is obstruction of Congress. So everybody is aware of obstruction of justice. You attempt to shut down an investigation, usually bribing witnesses, destroying evidence, et cetera. Their theory is Congress, have subpoenaed a bunch of documents and a bunch of witnesses, and you have asserted executive privilege to prevent them from testifying and not give us the documents. And you've been so overbroad in your assertions that we think you are trying to obstruct us in our impeachment inquiry. Well, executive privilege is a very, very serious issue. It exists so that the president can get candid advice from those people who are around him. Presidents dating back to George Washington have asserted executive privilege, and usually these knotty constitutional battles are fought in court, but the Democrats didn't want to proceed in court. They were in their haste to get something done. They wouldn't let the court system play itself out. And so if you're going to start impeaching presidents for defying congressional subpoenas and asserting executive privilege, we're going to be impeaching every president from now for the rest of our, till the rest of our natural born days.
Yeah, and that's my big, well, not my concern, but that's definitely going to happen, right? If it's going to be this politicized, then why not every time there's a different Congress than the president's party? Can we go down executive privilege a little bit more? Because I'm glad you brought it up, because I've been hearing a lot about it. So go back to the beginning of it. What is it? When would it be used for? When's it appropriate? When do you think maybe it's not appropriate to use executive privilege?
Sure. Well, we have all kinds of different privileges in the law. There's an attorney-client privilege, there's a doctor-patient privilege, there's a spousal privilege, there's a priest-penitent privilege. All of these privileges exist, including executive privilege, to say, well, yes, we are preventing information from being disclosed publicly. That can hinder the truth-seeking process, but we do it because there's a greater social value that we have in mind. We want people who come in for medical care to be very candid about their conditions. We want people who show up in lawyers' offices seeking representation to be honest about what it is that they've done. We want spouses to be able to share secrets with each other. For the president, we rely on the president to make all sorts of incredibly important decisions that affect our nation. Presidents don't do this alone. Presidents need advice from the people around them, and they need candid advice. And the idea of having an executive privilege is to be able to say, Mr. President, you should be able to get that candid advice without all of the people who are giving you that advice worrying about how this is going to damage their reputations if what they say ever gets out. So, presidents have asserted executive privilege, where the only time where this really came to a major battle was when Richard Nixon tried to prevent the tapes, the Watergate tapes from being disclosed, the Oval Office tapes. And the Supreme Court acknowledged that an executive privilege exists. It's grounded in separation of powers in the Constitution, but that it can be overcome if this is a serious investigation about outright criminality and a prosecutor has demonstrated that they have no other way of getting this information. It's a very cloudy area. It's unclear what the parameters of executive privilege are. But that's why the president was fighting this out in court. He was citing documents that came, for example, out of the Justice Department during President Obama's days, when he refused to turn over evidence related to the Fast and Furious investigation, and the Office of Legal Counsel during the Obama Justice Department said that that the people around the president, when they give this advice, a president can assert executive privilege so that they don't even have to appear to give testimony. That's what he's asserted.
Oh, John, that's so well articulated. So, excuse my ignorance on this. What did the courts ultimately say with Nixon? With those tapes, is that why those tapes were released? Because the court said so?
Yes, unanimously. The Supreme Court said, we recognize executive privilege. It's grounded in separation of powers, but this is a criminal investigation. There's a colorable reason to believe that those tapes contain evidence of criminality, and that was enough to overcome the privilege. And then when the president was forced to release those tapes, within 48 hours, a bipartisan delegation from Congress went to the White House, told the president, you are going to be impeached, you are going to be convicted, you are going to be removed from office.
Wow.
And he chose a better course of valor and resigned.
Do you know of any situation where the court has said attorney-client privilege, same thing, right? Analogous, like we understand it, but in this case, no. Or all those other types of privileges, have a court ever said, not in this situation?
Yeah, there are exceptions to most of these privileges. In the case, for instance, of the doctor-patient privilege, if a doctor believes that a patient has a wildly infectious disease and is a danger to the public the moment he walks out of the office, he's got to report that to health officials. And in terms of the attorney-client privilege, There is a crime fraud exception. So it's one thing to walk into an attorney's office and to say, I would like to tell you about the crime that I have committed. That is protected. But if he walks in and says, I'm thinking about committing a crime and I'd like your help, and the attorney is going to be a co-conspirator in that crime, that can breach the privilege.
Very good. Okay, so there have been exemptions for the other ones, and there's exemptions for this executive one as well. So to wrap this conversation up, and this is so insightful, what exactly do the Democrats, what did or do they want that the president is saying, no, you can't, it's executive privilege?
Well, they want to get notes from things like the State Department. They want to hear testimony from acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, from the former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, and various people who sort of report to them. They initially issued subpoenas to people like John Bolton. When he went to court and said, I want a judge to decide whether I have to appear or not, they withdrew their subpoena. In their haste, they went ahead and impeached the president anyway. And now they're saying, well, we'd like to hear from him. I will see at the end of the day whether the Senate is going to authorize calling witnesses. My guess is that if they authorize calling John Bolton, and I don't think they will, they're also going to insist that Hunter Biden testify. And my guess is at the end of the day, we're not going to hear from any witnesses at all. But, that I could well be wrong about that.
What do you think the courts would say if this went through the process like Nixon, right? If it went to the Supreme Court, do you think the courts would protect executive privilege or no in this case?
Well, I think the odds are halfway decent that the president would win on those issues. This is his national security advisor. But, look, if the argument is that he was really committing a crime, it might breach the privilege. It's very hard to say. So a lower court actually ruled in Congress's favor with respect to Mick Mulvaney, saying he should have to testify. The president appealed that. It's actually still pending before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. But a lot of this was short-circuited when the Democrats withdrew their subpoena.
Yeah, very good. Last question, I promise. What is your advice to the Republicans or the Republican lawyers, I should say, the president's counsels, as they make their opening arguments? What's your advice?
Well, look, they're going to have to rebut what the House impeachment managers are saying, and they will also make their case that the president has done a lot of good things and that this is really all about policy and that the Democrats have been out to impeach him since the moment he took the oath of office. I mean, literally within 2 weeks after the guy took the oath of office, Representative Al Green from Texas was filing the first article of impeachment. The whistleblower's lawyer, Mark Zaid, 10 days after the president took the oath of office, sent out a tweet saying the impeachment process has begun. #coup, #lawyers. And so I think he's going to say that this is all about political differences and that this impeachment is designed to really interfere with the 2020 election and to undo the votes of the 63 million people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016.
Amen. And I would argue nary a mind will be changed. Is that probably the case?
I think that's right.
Yeah, John Malcolm, man, thanks for your insight, John. Vice President, Heritage Institute for Constitutional Government. John, hopefully maybe we could talk next week or the week after and do another recap.
Sounds great. Good to be with you.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate you. True story. Mike Slater, more coming up. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. I want to talk about AOC here for a minute. I remember when AOC first hit the scene, everyone was laughing at her. She's an idiot, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, no. She is she's got a lot of charisma. She's very charming. She's going to stick around for a very, very long time. And alas, here we are. And her fame and influence is growing. So let's start off with a funny clip from AOC. She was asked something about Jeff Bezos' money, and she said, it's not about your money. Here's the rest of what she says.
Usually if you're a billionaire, that means that you control a massive system. It means that you own oil supplies. It means that you control textiles. It means that you have a massive labor force under your control. And to be ethical, if you're a billionaire today, the thing that you need to do is give up control and power. So I don't want your money as much as we want your power. The people, not me. That's going to get cut and clipped.
That's funny. It's funny to actually realize how bad that sounds. But she's right. I mean, she let it slip a bit. It's all about money and power. Power over you and power over companies, which progressives are trained to see as a force for bad. She went on to say this. She went on to say, no one ever makes $1 billion. You take $1 billion. I'm not here to villainize and say billionaires are inherently morally corrupt, but I am, right? It's to say that the system that we live in, life in capitalism, always ends in billionaires. And I hear she said that, and gosh, this is all old stuff, right? But I hear that sentence that life in capitalism always ends in billionaires. And I hear that, I think, yeah. What's your point? Who cares? We could do some, advanced economic analysis here, but no one ever finishes that thought, right? They just leave it at this cliffhanger. Life in capitalism always ends in billionaires. And what? What's the problem? So why do they do that? It's all envy, right? Our argument is entirely rooted in envy. That person's a billionaire, you're not. Don't you feel bad about that? That's all it is. There's zero economic problem with having a country and living in a country with billionaires in it. The same thing with the the income inequality debate that was big a couple years ago. It's less so now, but we'll see if Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders win. You're going to hear a lot more of this class warfare stuff. But so we live in a country with economic inequality. So what's your point? Why is that bad? They never make that argument. They just want you to assume it's bad because it's envy. Right? We know the truth. Billionaires don't make you less wealthy. No billionaire took your money. There's two arguments that the left has made on this point since Marx. Right? So the first is the claim that if someone's getting richer, that means you are getting poorer. All right? You've heard this a million times. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's not true. Not true. In America, everyone's getting richer. But the perception that's created there is that it's a zero-sum game, right? Someone else is making money, that means they're taking it from you. And that's what she was talking about there. Got to completely change that mindset. It's mutually beneficial voluntary trade. That's the official term. Mutually beneficial voluntary trade. So Bill Gates made a computer. I bought it voluntarily. It made my life more valuable. This computer made my life more valuable than the $500 that I had, and I gave him for it. I give the $500. He gets a portion of that, a very small portion, but a lot of other people get part of it too. And then he happens to make a product that a lot of people are willing to spend $500 for. So he gets a lot of little bits of $500, and it all adds up to a lot of money. But the point is, he didn't take money from me. He didn't take anything from me. I voluntarily gave it to him for my benefit. It made my life better. His product made my life better. Otherwise, I wouldn't give him money for it. Mutually beneficial, everyone benefits, voluntary, that's the key, as opposed to government, voluntary trade. So that's their first claim, right? That people are getting richer, you're getting poorer, blah, blah, blah. They're taking your money. I don't hear that used as often anymore. They have a new argument that they've been using a little more frequently. Here is AOC. She said, you didn't make those widgets, did you? Because you employed thousands of people and paid them less than a living wage to make those widgets for you. You didn't make those widgets, Jeff Bezos. You sat on a couch while thousands of people were paid modern day slave wages. You sat on a couch while thousands of people, so again, more envy there, right? That's what that is. That's what the sitting on the couch is. Right? You workers, you're out there working your butt off, and that rich fat cat CEO is just munching on his cigar laying on the couch. Right? More envy. A lie, too. Rich people, CEOs, they work very hard. And more importantly than that, they do things and they have skill sets that you don't have, AOC. Otherwise, you would be a billionaire or a CEO of a major company, but you're not because you can't. That's the first thing. They're not sitting on their couch. Second thing, slave wages? That doesn't even make any sense. There's no such thing as a slave wage. Slaves didn't make any wages. That's the point. So you know what they do? They change this term. I've never heard this before. Modern day slave wages. The heck does that mean? Modern day slave wages? What, anything less than $15 an hour? Is that a modern day slave wage? Is that how you're characterizing that now? Remember the whole push for 15 thing a couple years ago? Right, $15 an hour, new minimum wage. And now anything less than that is a slave wage? So now they made up, because $15 isn't enough, obviously, because if you're just gonna make up numbers, like why is $15? So now they made up this new term, livable wage. So if you're a livable wage, I don't even know what they're, like, it's like $25 an hour now. So it's never enough for these folks. Here's my main point. The argument that you, Jeff Bezos, billionaire, you didn't make the widgets. Thousands of other people did. All your employees did. It's the Obama, you didn't build that argument, right? Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, they have the exact same rhetoric. Here's the problem with that. There's a little bit of truth to it. There's just a little, enough of truth to it to make it sound right if you're not intellectually curious enough to learn more, right? This is why it's an effective argument for AOC. I think this is why the left has pivoted to this argument, the you didn't build it argument, right? The other arguments are effective because envy is involved, and envy is a very powerful emotion. But this argument is effective because it has a little bit of truth to it. So yesterday, I got a package delivered to my house from Amazon. Jeff Bezos did not deliver it. Jeff Bezos did not ring my doorbell and leave the package by the front door. I bought it on Amazon, a website that Jeff Bezos did not code. He did not code the website. So that's true. Like, he didn't do that. He didn't build that. And it's true that Jeff Bezos wouldn't be successful if it weren't for all of his employees out delivering packages and working on websites and all that stuff. It's true. But there would be no packages to deliver. There would be no website to work on if it weren't for Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, he's a very fascinating backstory. He quit his job, a really high-paying job, I think it was on Wall Street, to take a big risk and start selling books online. It's something we look at now and we say, well, yeah, of course that was a thing that would happen. Of course people sell books online. No, that's not an of course. It wasn't inevitable that this would happen. If it weren't for him, it might not have. And then all these jobs wouldn't exist. And free two-day or same-day shipping wouldn't be a thing. It brings us a lot of value. And he took an incredible risk to make that happen and deserves to benefit from that. So what's the opposite of envy? AOC traffics in envy. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, they traffic in envy. So what's the opposite of envy? Gratitude. A bit of gratitude. How about a bit of gratitude for having a job? Instead of living in this envious state of this guy has more money than I do, how about a little gratitude that we have any job, that he made a job? My church played this video like a week or two before Christmas. I'm not gonna play the whole thing, but it starts off, the guy wakes up and he's covered in wrapping paper, like Christmas wrapping paper, and he wakes up and he's like, oh, this is amazing, I'm alive. And then his wife gets up and she's covered in wrapping paper. She goes, oh, honey, I love you. Oh, this is great. And then his kid walks in covered in wrapping paper. He's like, Daddy, what's going on? And I think we pick it up here.
Honey, the power works. It goes on and off whenever we want. We've got clean water. Oh, that's great. Look at that. Ooh. I bet I know what this does. Rain down the glorious water. Shoes. Oh, what do we got here, guys? Food. I love food. What? You gonna have work? This is awesome. Look, listen here. Feed? The what?
Jack, be careful!
I have a car! This is great. Did you guys see this?
Yeah, you have a car!
A car!
And don't forget your coffee.
You're the best.
Funny. So my favorite part of that is when his kid gives him his briefcase all wrapped up and he goes, I have work? Did you think that this morning? I don't think any of those, right? I just turn on the lights, like all that stuff. Turn on the water. Of course I have clean water. Man, we take all that for granted. But that attitude of, oh man, I have a job. It's awesome. Thank goodness. Do you want more money? Of course. Who doesn't want more money? But without the person who made the job, you have no money. AOC, did you own that coffee house that you worked in Brooklyn? Did you take the risk? Did you lease the property? Did you buy all the products? Did you hire all the employees? Did you take all that risk that coffee shop that you worked at? Of course not. But were you grateful for the people who did? Probably not. By the way, the place you worked at is now out of business. It's hard running a business. Very hard. Being a congressman and spouting off on things you don't understand and making people envious of others, that's very easy. Mike Slater, true story. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. We mentioned this study a couple days ago, but I'm excited to talk to one of the lead authors of it, Brad Wilcox. He's a professor of sociology at UVA and also from the Institute for Family Studies. Brad, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Mike. How are you doing?
Good to talk to you. So the study here is State of Contradiction, Progressive Family Culture and Traditional Family Structure in California. What did you guys conclude, and where did this all begin?
Well, I think California's been at the vanguard of a lot of family change in America, from no-fault divorce to any number of shows, movies, and other offerings from Hollywood. But what's striking in part about our report is we find there are more traditional families in California than there are in the nation as a whole. So about 67% of parents in California are in intact married families, compared to just 63% in the nation as a whole. That's one example of this playing out. The other thing we find in the report is that college-educated Californians, sort of the California elite, if you will, are much more likely to embrace family diversity in public, overwhelmingly support family diversity as a kind of public ethic in our report. When it comes to kind of their own plan, they're also much more likely than other Californians to personally want to have their kids in marriage and to be stably married. But 80% of them are stably married compared to just about 60% of other California residents. There's kind of a contradiction there in terms of embracing kind of a more progressive view in the abstract and public, but then for yourself, for your own marriage, your own kids, much more likely to kind of go at family life in a more traditional, conventional way, if you will.
Yeah, amazing. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think there's obviously a lot going on. Part of the California story is there are a lot of immigrants and a lot of Asians in California, and both immigrants and Asians are much more likely to forge strong and stable marriages. They're much more likely to appreciate the importance of marriage, of having kids in marriage, of sticking it out when there are tough times in a marriage. That's part of the story about California. But when it comes to kind of California elites more generally, talking left, living right, I think the story there is that there's an incentive today, right, in the culture to kind of tip the hat to family diversity and to, if you're working as a writer or director or producer in Southern California, to kind of do shows, do movies, like The Single Parent's a new show, or like The Marriage Story, obviously a new movie, gotten a lot of critical acclaim, up for a bunch of Oscars. These are shows that kind of, glamorize or validate or whatever, lift up, non-traditional families. So there's a kind of a status incentive, I think, in many circles in California, and there's a financial incentive given the industry to, push boundaries and hope to sell, and get a lot of eyeballs on a show or movie for doing so. But there's also, I think, an increasing recognition since the 80s, since the divorce revolution played out, that, this particular approach to family life just doesn't work for most adults and kids. And if you want to have a decent 401k, if you want to have a decent home in the Hollywood Hills, if you want your kids to avoid, drug abuse and school failure, it's much better personally to get married and to stay married. In fact, one of the striking things about our report is we find that there is a neighborhood in the heart of historic Hollywood, the Whitley Heights neighborhood, that sort of sits just in the shadow of the Hollywood sign, between the Hollywood sign and the Dolby Theater where the Oscars ceremony is held, that has essentially no single-parent families. I mean, it's just kind of amazing that right there in this, and the Holly Drive runs right through this neighborhood in the center of Hollywood. And you kind of look at this data, this cool thing called the Opportunity Atlas that's been put out by Harvard. It allows you to kind of look at neighborhood trends, and you find this startling statistic that this neighborhood, again in the heart of Hollywood, has basically no single-parent families, and that's because
amazing. And it's, please go ahead, finish that thought.
No, I think the folks in that neighborhood, I think, either explicitly or implicitly recognize, appreciate, understand that, it's just better for them and for their kids to kind of do it with two parents.
It's sad because we talked with Rob Henderson a couple weeks ago, and he wrote that nice editorial about luxury beliefs, right? So it's just sad that these guys can preach and put out all this, Hollywood TV shows and everything that preach a family style that's damaging and destructive, particularly to the low-income people who then do go live that lifestyle, even though they themselves don't. That's frustrating. I don't know if you remember, Amy Wax and Larry Alexander, a couple of years ago, they wrote this editorial in the Philadelphia paper about bourgeois values and how everyone should live the old bourgeois values. And the big one was get married, get a job, get married, then have kids, right? Among other things, like don't do drugs.
Sure. Right.
And huge outrage, right? Blah, blah, blah. And so I'm here in San Diego, and Larry Alexander is a professor at USD. And there's such outrage to get this guy fired that the dean of the law school at USD came out and said, we'd like to distance ourselves from this charge about what Larry, we'd like to distance ourselves. I'm like, no, you hypocrite, you live bourgeois values, right? That's why you're the dean of the law school. And all the professors there live these values as well. So it's so fascinating that today's culture, we can't proudly say this is the way. How would you word that? I want to say it's the best way. Like, what's the way? Like, this is how you should do life, or how do you articulate that?
We have been looking at this thing called the success sequence, and the success sequence tells us that basically at least high school, then we're in your 20s, and then marry before having any kids, your odds of making it to the middle class are about 86%, and your odds of avoiding poverty are about 97%. So, kind of tried and true formula here that is, I think, kind of known to people who kind of study these issues, but there's a real reluctance to publicly articulate the value of strong and stable family in more public forum.
Hate that. Which is why I'm grateful for you for getting out there and getting some truth here. Big picture, I got a question. I think lately, there's been an understanding about the importance of dads in families and single motherhood and issues that come with that. So I think people are starting to understand that and talk about that and whatever. What's another problem in our culture that you're seeing that you think is also very destructive to kids that we're not talking as much about?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we're not talking about kind of is the importance of putting marriage before the baby carriage. A lot of folks, when you talk about these issues in more elite circles, in the academy, in Washington think tanks, among journalists, I mean, they'll sort of acknowledge the importance today, and this is progress, of stable two-parent families. But they kind of will put a functional equivalent between cohabitation and marriage. Not recognizing that marriage is much less stable than is cohabitation.
So what's the difference from a kid's perspective? What's the difference between having two parents who are married versus two parents who are cohabitating?
Well, the issue with cohabitation is there's kind of no public ceremony, there's no public exchange of vows, there's no formal buy-in from both sets of family and friends, with that marriage ceremony and everything else that goes with marriage. And so what you see among cohabiting couples, including those who are having children together, is they're much more likely to break up. I mean, as anyone who's had kids knows, raising children, raising a baby is really stressful, really hard. And if you don't have that backstop of kind of that public commitment that institution, those norms, the sense from your own family, from your in-laws, that you're all on board together with this whole enterprise, it's much harder to make it. And so we see cohabiting couples who are having kids are about twice as likely, even controlling for things like education, race, income, to break up compared to married parents. So marriage is the way, is the path to forge a strong and stable family in America today. And yet there's not a public recognition, not a willingness to talk about that among elites, including the kinds of people you just referenced at the University of San Diego.
Yeah, really good. Last question for you. Your students at UVA, when they come in to your classes and they hear this stuff, where are they entering? Like, what are their thoughts on this stuff as they start? And then as you present a case and you guys discuss it and everything, where do you think your students generally are leaving? Or what's clicking with them after?
Yeah, a lot of my students at UVA kind of come in with this idea that all family forms are relatively equal, that marriage is just a piece of paper, it's not really different. With the science on this question, they pretty come to see how kind of just moving in with someone without any clear direction or purpose or plan for your problematic long term, especially if you're bringing a kid into that situation. And they also come to appreciate too how much marriage tends to give people a sense of direction, meaning, purposefulty, in their lives. So, it's just striking to me that, within a few weeks of kind of giving them, a lot of good studies and some good books, they can kind of grow to appreciate the value of marriage today, even obviously in the 21st century.
Yeah, that's super encouraging that kids can figure that out relatively quickly with your insight. Brad Wilcox, where should we send people to read this study and learn more?
They can find the study at familystudies.org under the research section, and then there's just a lot more on our blog, dealing with these kinds of issues: marriage, parenthood, fatherhood, divorce, all those kinds of issues.
Really good. Familystudies.org. Brad, please keep up the good work and pass my best on to all your coworkers on this stuff. Really good stuff.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Appreciate the good
Thanks,
work.
Brad. Appreciate you. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, thanks for being here. We played a clip yesterday. Remember we talked about Greta at Davos, at the World Economic Forum, and she was talking about global warming and how the house is on fire and you don't act like you love your children, and all this nonsense. And we played a clip of Jordan Peterson. We actually played 2 clips from Jordan Peterson. They were so good, I want to break them down a little bit more. They're too good to rush through. So let's play I think we're only going to have time to play one of these clips and break it down. So let's do the first clip that we played yesterday from Jordan Peterson.
So what is your advice to young people when you talk about you need to be individually responsible, but when there are things that are so far out of our control, like climate catastrophe, like the precarious job economy, like the
They're not
economic
as far
crisis,
out of your control as you think.
What is your answer to
Do you think
people
that
who
you're
are
worse
facing
off
these
than
questions?
you think that you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think there are different challenges.
Do you think you're worse off than your grandparents?
The argument, I think, is that individual responsibility does not change the climate, does not fix the problem that needs global collective responsibility. So I think that's the core of the question. Do you have a theory about that?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, and then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
Oh, so good. That's so good. All right, let's slow this down. So you can do a tremendous amount of good for you and the people around you. Let's make this super personal. So imagine you, and imagine the people you love the most around you, right? So you have you right here, and then you have your spouse and your kids and your coworkers and your friends, right? So literally imagine them standing around you. So I think fundamentally first, do you want to do good for you? Right? That's the fundamental question. Do you want to do good for you? Yes. Okay. Do you want to do good for them? Yes. Okay. Good. Great. Now, you can do a lot of good for you, and you can do a lot of good for the people around you if you look at your own inadequacies and your own flaws and the things you're not doing in your life. Everyone shuts down. That's the end of that, right? Like, it's amazing. Like, I want to do better. I want better for my life. I want better for my family's life. What do I do? What do I do? Oh, I gotta look at my own inadequacies. Not interested. Or as this woman would say, did you notice her head? Her head was tilted like this. This is not a posture of, I'm listening to what you're saying, right? She didn't want to hear that, right? That's where everyone shuts down, because it's like, no, you don't understand, Dr. Peterson. They need to figure out their own inadequacies. Don't you hear what I'm saying? They're the problem. They're the ones who need to fix their flaws. They're the ones who need to start doing things right. Not me. Not me. I got everything down great. I'm wonderful. They're the problem. The other night we had a Bible talk, a co-ed family Bible talk, and our group is growing. We got a lot of kids in our group now. My daughter is the youngest. She's almost 2, and we got I think it goes up to like 8 or something, right? There's maybe, I don't know, 8 or 10 kids. So this was on Tuesday night, and it was chaos. It was absolute chaos. Usually the kids are pretty good. The other night, awful. The adults, we were having the study, and we were talking about our connection with God, or really our disconnect from God. And when we do that, it's all self-reliance, right? It's just our futile, anxiety-ridden self-reliance, and that's, so you're disconnected from God, and then it comes down to self-reliance, and we just can't do it, right? You just can't do it. And we started talking about how we know we're disconnected from God, and how we can see that our spouse is not connected with God. And someone said, I can tell that I'm not connected with God like I need to be when my kids are acting crazy. And so that was her sign that she's not where she needs to be in relationship with God. And just when she said that, some kid, probably mine, did something super reckless and loud. I don't know, like kicked over a tower or something like super, super loud. And the timing was perfect. And it just clicked for all of us at that moment right there. The like operating frequency of our kids is a direct reflection of the parents, of my connection with each other, right? The parents' connection and the connection with God. If I'm disconnected with my wife and with God, then they're more wild. And if I'm more connected, then they can sense that peace. And then they're more peaceful. And it just all clicked for all of us around the table at that moment. And looking back, that sounds right. It just clicked the other day. I'm going to test it moving forward and see how true it is, but it sounds right. So I share that story because it's so easy to say, that kid is a problem. That kid needs fixing. And they do, right? My son Jack was a punk that night. So he needs fixing and discipline and all that. But I need the fixing first. I need that communion first. I need the peace first before I can ever expect him to have it. I was talking to a friend the other day. Came up on our radio show the other day. Therapy, I forget how, but I don't understand why culture has such a stigma on going to therapy. It makes no sense to me. Why would you criticize someone for wanting to better themselves? Why would you criticize someone for wanting to self-examine their lives and their past and how their past affects how they think and act today so that they can see reality clearly in front of them? Like, that makes no sense to me. Why is there a stigma to that? Why is there a stigma to bettering yourself? It'd be like having a stigma for going to the hospital if you cut your finger off, right? No one's like, oh, what a wuss. You cut your finger off and you're gonna go see a doctor? So I don't get that. My friend has been going to marriage counseling. He's an amazing dad, amazing husband, like a great, great family. And they go to marriage counseling. And I told him the same thing I just said. And I said, what's up with the stigma? And he said, oh, it's pride. So it's pride. No one wants to admit that they're the one who needs worked on. Because I got it down. I'm perfect. Or we do this one, and this was the one that I could more relate to, is I'm not that bad, and who does that guy think he is? That he can fix me? Who does he think he is that he could teach me anything? What could I possibly learn from him? Because I'm so much better than him. So it's just pride. So anyway, I share that because I don't know who needs to hear that now, but get over your pride. Go to therapy. Just go. And if you cut your finger off the other day, you should go to the hospital. Right? Just go. Like, it's the same thing in my brain. Just go. You should go do that. And if you want to do a tremendous amount of good for you and for the people you love, fix yourself first, as Jordan Peterson said. Fix yourself first. So then you can make wise decisions about your life. You're never going to make wise decisions if you haven't fixed yourself first. So fix yourself first, then you can make wise decisions. And then, after like a decade of making wise decisions about you and the people around you, then you can make wise political decisions for others. Get your own house in order before you go about reorganizing the world, as Dr. Peterson said. The chapter from his book, 12 Rules for Life, which of course you got to read, is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Ties into gratitude in a way that what we talked about a couple seconds ago. And that woman, when she heard that message right there, which, like, by the way, like, who could disagree with what I just said? Like, I mean, I mean that like you're the problem. If you disagree, I'm right? I don't mean that egotistically. I should listen to my own advice. But seriously, like, who disagrees? Who's like, no, you don't need to fix yourself before you start making decisions for yourself and other people, right? Like, I don't get it. So this woman, when she hears that advice, do you hear her shake her head? She's like, no, wrong. She says, like, what are you talking about? No, I don't need to get my house in order. The top comment on that video on YouTube, by the way, YouTube comments are usually just the dredge of the world. So I usually never ever read them, but I happened to scroll down on this one. And the top comment was, she looks like she hasn't cleaned her room. And then you saw the other woman too. There was another woman they cut to in the middle who was like disgusted and confused as well. How many of us have that posture moving forward? One of our listener on our radio show said that that woman made, at the end there, when she shook her head, she made the face that his kids make when he makes them eat something that's good for them. Just disgust and rejection. Because she wasn't looking for truth. And that's my point. Like, most of the time we're not. She didn't ask that question genuinely looking for an answer. She asked it hoping that she would like change his mind. And then when that didn't happen, she just dismissed him as ignorant. It's an old point. Get the plank out of your eye. That's what it is. And we all need way, way, way more self-reflection before we go solving the problems of the world. And all this wokeness, all the wokeness that we see in our culture, all of it is the product of people not getting their own lives in order. There's a second part of that clip, but we're out of time. We'll get to it tomorrow. True story with Mike Slater. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.